Chairman Schiff, welcome to the program. I'm going to get to China in just a moment, but I just want to ask you, as a ranking member on Capitol Hill there, what you made of the debate. And I don't mean, you know, the process and all the rest of it. What do you think was the most important matter of substance that happened on that stage?
Well, you know, given I've had such a focus as I've had to on democracy and the risk to our democracy, what concerned me the most that happened on that stage was the president urging his people to go to polling places, his unwillingness to accept the result of the election, his effort to discredit millions of absentee ballots, his pushing out of propaganda that the Russians are amplifying. All of that is an attack on our democracy. And then you add to it the unwillingness to condemn white supremacist groups and how they are now running with his comments. That, to me, is the most dangerous and significant outcome of that debacle we witnessed last night.
Well, let me just play then a little snippet of the issue of election integrity and accepting the vote and a peaceful transition.
He cannot stop you from being able to determine the outcome of this election. And in terms of whether or not, when the votes are counted, and they're all counted, that will be accepted. If I win, that will be accepted. If I lose, that'll be accepted.
I am urging my people. I hope it's going to be a fair election. If it's a fair election, I am 100% on board. But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that.
Chairman Schiff, you know, many of you and the independent analysts keep saying there's no evidence of any massive fraud in the past having used mail-in ballots. I guess I want to know what the system, is the system strong enough in your country to actually enforce the correct result of an election, whichever way it goes? Is there a chance that it could be endlessly disputed and it could become, you know, something even worse than what the world saw over the 2000 election?
Well, in a normal circumstance, the system is more than capable of handling this. We've handled millions and millions of absentee ballots without a problem in the past. But we've never had a president who was the problem, a president who is seeking to discredit the election in advance, to cast doubt on it, to raise suspicions about it, who is encouraging of foreign powers like Russia to do the same and amplify his false messages. And if we have the election, and the president does what he is capable of doing, and that is declaring a false victory before the votes have been counted, and then unleashing legal dogs to try to attack the balloting process, and egging on people around the country to acts of violence, which he is also more than capable of doing, then we're in very uncharted waters. I think the remedy here is Americans doing their civil and civic duty, and turning out in such massive numbers that the election isn't even close, that any effort by the president to dispute the results falls on deaf ears. But if it is close and the president can contest it, I think it could be far worse than what we saw in 2000.
You heard what I introduced the program with, which were the horrified reactions from allied states around the world. Now, the main adversary or competitor, China, which we're going to talk about in more detail in a moment, also had some things to say. Obviously not President Xi and not the actual party leadership, but the Times, the Global Times, which is closely aligned with the leadership, said the candidates and the debate obviously did not show an exemplary role to the American people on how to engage in debate. So that's their comment. I want to know what you think in terms of foreign interference. You know, most people believe that Russia is the main foreign instigator into, you know, confusing the American democratic process. But others, some of them, like President Trump, talks about China doing that. What do you know in terms of intelligence? Who's the biggest culprit in interfering in America's elections?
There's no question when you look at the intelligence that it is Russia that is most actively intervening to try to determine the result, to try to help re-elect Donald Trump, and to sow chaos in the United States. And it's doing that in a number of ways on social media, through hacking operations. But it is amplifying the president's false claims about mail-in voting and amplifying the president's false smears against Joe Biden. China, the intelligence community has acknowledged publicly, has a preference for who wins. Now, that's not uncommon. Probably most nations on Earth have a preference about who they'd like to see as President of the United States. It's a very different thing, though, when you're engaged across a whole series of modalities to try to influence the outcome and do so covertly. That's what the Russians are doing, and that puts them in a completely different category.
We had an interesting report last night suggesting that certainly the Kremlin's chief propagandist is having a potential change of heart after 4 years of Trump, but we'll see. I ask you about this because a whistleblower, Brian Murphy from the Department of Homeland Security, claims that he was ordered by the White House to stop producing intelligence reports about Russian interference and instead focus on the threats posed by China and Iran. You've just explained that, but I want to so ask you, your committee has come up with a very important intelligence report and assessment about China, essentially saying that you all are not up to countering a rising China. I mean, that sounds pretty bleak and pretty catastrophic. What exactly does it mean, and why are you not up to this?
Well, you know, a couple things. We are pursuing the whistleblower investigation, as you mentioned, these disturbing allegations, which we have seen, frankly, in other areas more than corroborated that the administration is trying to suppress information about Russia's threat to the elections and hype the threat from others. So that perversion of the intelligence community is deeply damaging and destructive. There'll be a long period of recovery for the intelligence community when the Trump chapter is over to regain that kind of independence it really must have to speak truth to power. But in terms of the China threat, for decades now, we have so focused on the counterterrorism threat that we have, I think, allowed to atrophy our positioning with respect to hard targets like China. And given China's dramatic rise and how China is challenging us in every field of domain, on the sea, on land, in development assistance, in diplomacy, in space, in military matters, with its Road and Belt Initiative, it means that we need to be at the top of our game. We need first-class insight into Chinese leadership and intentions, and we're going to have to move this aircraft carrier that is the intelligence community in that direction, and that's going to take time, and we need to get that started right now.
But you also say that the intelligence community needs to broaden the efforts, needs to bring on, experts in other domains like technology, health, the economy, etc. Explain what you're calling on.
Well, for example, and you couldn't have a more profound example right now than the pandemic. I think prior to probably January of this year, it was hard to imagine that a soft threat, what was considered a soft threat, like a health threat, would claim the lives of more Americans than any other threat we were looking at in terms of terrorism or nation-state actors, and yet it has. And so we need not only to have a focus on China as a specific hard target and capable and rising power, but that needs to be integrated into all of the disciplines so that when we look at health issues, we're looking at them in their own right, but also with an eye towards China and health threats that may emanate from China. When we're looking at technological issues, when we're looking at issues of democracy versus authoritarianism, we need to look at China's employment of CCTV cameras and big data analytics and facial recognition software, the export of those technologies around the world. So we need to be able to integrate that expertise on China with the expertise in our agencies on technology. The same is true of space. The same is true at sea, and really in every way. We're going to have to up our game in order to compete successfully.
And do you think, like others have said on this program, that there is a closing window of opportunity?
I think there's still time to do this, and we still have tremendous advantages and resources. You would think from China's rise and a lot of the concern about it that they're spending much more on their military and diplomatic efforts. They're not. We're spending more. We're just not spending it as wisely as I think we need to in light of the challenges we face. And we took a fresh look in the Intelligence Committee at our intelligence posture. We need to do the same thing in defense, in diplomacy, in foreign assistance, to make sure that we are getting the maximum bang for the buck and that we're investing in ways that help us meet this challenge.
I just want to ask you on national security. There's been a lot made over the last few days, certainly, about the threat to national security of white supremacists. Here's the whistleblower who I mentioned, Brian Murphy of the DHS, came forward and said he claims he was ordered to downplay the security risk from white nationalist terror groups. Concerned that that is, like the FBI and others say, is a very serious threat and a national security risk to the United States. You just heard the conversation we had at the end of our last panel.
Oh, without a doubt. You know, it is the preeminent domestic terror threat comes from these white nationalist group, these right-wing violent groups. And we see, unfortunately, a lot of this proliferating online. You also see dangerous conspiracy theory groups like QAnon. And this poses a very dramatic challenge to us. And again, any efforts by the intelligence community to downplay that threat because it embarrasses the president or because it's not consistent with the narrative that they would like to tell, which is so focused on Antifa and other things, that's a singular disservice to the country and puts us more at risk. So, yes, it's a grave problem, it's a growing problem, and it's one we need to pay attention to.
And apparently you've issued a subpoena for more information on this from the department.
Yes, we've had to. The Department of Homeland Security, much like we have seen over the last few years, like other agencies, is tragically stonewalling our investigation, putting artificial roadblocks in the way, refusing to turn over certain documents, refusing to give lawyers clearances so that we can interview their clients, including the whistleblower himself. So they're doing what they can to drag their feet, and we are doing what we can and what we must by using compulsory process like subpoenas to demand answers. And we're going to stay at it until we get those answers.
And finally, and I've got about 30 seconds for you to answer this. The New York Times reports of the Trump tax records suggest that he's $400 million in debt that he needs to repay sometime during, if he's re-elected, the course of the presidency. How does that impact, do you think, from your perspective, on the performance as president? And is there a national security implication to that?
Well, there's absolutely a national security implication. We don't know who the holders of these debts are. We've tried to find out. We've subpoenaed, for example, the Deutsche Bank records. This was a bank known for its laundering of Russian money, one of the few, if only, banks that would still lend money to Donald Trump. If he's indebted to foreign powers or oligarchs, if he goes to foreign powers for essentially rescue when these debts are coming due, it obviously could warp U.S. policy in a way that's very dangerous for our country.
Chairman Schiff, thank you so much. Adam Schiff, thanks for joining us from Capitol Hill today.